G'day, I'm Tom Ravlic, and welcome to Critical Line Item. And thank you for joining me for this particular podcast. Now, some of you would know that the Critical Line Item came out of a sort of an accounting type um, issue that I began talking about back in May 2020 when the podcast first began, and we're back to accounting again because in recent times issues about tax agents and what they do and how they behave and ethical pronouncements, etc., have been all over the news. A little-known body called the Tax Practitioners Board regulates tax agents, and they've, I guess you could say they've struck a little bit of luck because one of the major accounting firms tripped up because one of their partners failed to keep things confidential that were given to him as part of a government consultation. To explore this is an old friend of mine and a tax agent and a tax trainer, Lisa Greig, who does a lot of work in this space. We're going to talk to you about what the TPB is, why it matters, what they do to tax agents when they do the wrong thing, and just generally give you a sense of why what the TPB decided is important. Lisa, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Tom.
The TPB, the Tax Practitioners Board, is the tax agent's regulator. Let's start with you first, because you're a tax agent, you're registered. What does the TPB impose on you as a regulator to make sure, they make sure that you're kosher and you're ready to roll as a tax agent?
Yeah, you can put it that way. Okay, so they provide us our ticket, if you want to call it that, just like someone needs a driver's license to drive on the road, for us to be able to provide tax advice or a tax services as defined by the Tax Practitioners Board and the ATO. We need to be licensed with them to be able to do it. So they check that we've got the knowledge, the skills, and the continued knowledge and skills, and we have to make sure we're of a good character. So they have a set of rules as well, which basically says we've got to be a fit and proper person, we've got to have good adherence to the tax laws, so we've got to make sure our own tax affairs are in place and those sort of things, and that's what they do. And so we need to first register with them, and then we get renewed every 3 years. And then on a yearly basis, we need to make an annual declaration to make sure that we've done all our necessary continuing professional development with them or for them or in the industry through various fields, and that we have up-to-date insurance to cover ourselves and make sure that we are a fit and proper person and haven't been convicted of any crimes and things like that for the year. So that's sort of how they do it. Now, I've got to have 2 registrations, Tom, because I need to have one as me as an individual, and I also have one as my practice that I operate under, because that's my, what we call our billing entity. So if I invoice out of my business entity, that's got to have a tax agent number as well. So I've got to have 2.
Okay. One of the things that's interesting about the TPB is that back when it first started, there were a range of ways in which people could enter into the TPB regime. And that was interesting. For those who don't know, I was involved as company secretary for a registered tax agent association for a while. And it's interesting when you see how the TPB works from the inside. And that includes a lot of work on the part of the individual practitioner to demonstrate that they meet one of the set hurdles for registration. They might have training, they might have other things that relate to experience. Each of the pathways had certain requirements, but once you met that pathway, you were in. How did you get into the TPB regime, Lisa? What was the process for you?
Yeah, it's quite interesting when you look at it because I was about to say it's a matrix, but it actually is a matrix of how to get in. So we've basically got a requirement on what services we can provide. So we've got payroll services or bookkeeping BAS services, or
Yeah.
we've got R&D services, or we've got full-blown tax services, which is basically the top level. And then we can get in, as you said, on a number of different angles, one of which is if you've got years and years and years of experience, you can come in, or do you have a degree or other qualifications? So I'm in on a 201, as we call it, Tom, which is basically we've done a degree. I've done the necessary academic qualifications, and I've had the required number of years of experience to be able to get in. So it's a combination. Is the higher qualifications you got, the less hurdle you've got a number of years experience. If you're trying to go in vocationally, which you can do, you've got to have a lot more years of experience to prove it, because it's really important to understand as well, because I do a lot of teaching. Learning the tax law is one thing, but learning how to apply it for your clients and learning how to deal with the tax office and things like that is sometimes a little bit different. So you've got to make sure there's that combination of skills, knowledge, academic qualifications, and of course on-the-job training, vocational training.
Now, we mentioned insurance before, but I think it's probably worthwhile just coming back to that. One of the things that the professional bodies require, and in particular the accounting bodies, the three of them here in Australia, the IPA, Institute of Public Accountants, Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, and CPA Australia, they've got what they would call practicing certificates, and part of that is that process of getting those certificates is for people to make sure they actually have professional indemnity insurance. If there's something that goes wrong or a client has a claim against an accountant, that is then dealt with through the insurer. The TPB has a similar requirement, and the TPB does require that, and that's a consumer protection measure, not just a measure to protect the actual practitioner themselves. So it cuts both ways. Now, it's all very smooth sailing if the practitioner is doing the right thing. But what we've recently observed is a case where a registered practitioner was involved in a government process, consulting on what would be revised tax legislation. The circumstances date back to 2014 and then 2016, and we're now in a position where a tax practitioner from PricewaterhouseCoopers had a finding made against him and no longer has a registration with the TPB. In fact, Peter Collins who no longer works at PricewaterhouseCoopers, no longer has a tax registration. It was terminated. That's the most severe penalty. But he can reapply for registration in 2 years' time. Then what the TPB has told the Parliamentary Committee over the past 48 hours is that the Tax Practitioners Board is able to penalise people fairly heavily in terms of when they're able to attempt to re-register. It's a 5-year the 5-year ban, if you could call it that, from registration. Peter Collins only got a 2-year one, so in 2 years' time, he can try and reapply. it's interesting that we're talking about the TPB today. This is a high-profile case. What message does that send first to the community about what the regulator does? Lisa?
Well, it's basically consumer protection the way that I see it, Tom. I mean, the big thing for me in terms of how I present my services is basically saying I am overly regulated, if I want to call it that, right? I've got my tax practitioner's board registration, my tax agent number. I've got my practicing certificate from 2 of the accounting bodies that you talked about. I'm also, I've got credentials from the Tax Institute as well in terms of knowledge and competence and things like that. So this is where we promote ourselves, right? As you know, like that. So,
Remind me, won't you? That does the Tax Institute also have its own practicing certificate from it?
no.
It doesn't. No.
It's more looked at. I think of the Tax Institute as providing the knowledge of my advisory abilities and things like that. Okay, so I'm a chartered tax advisor with them. They don't have a practicing certificate in that manner, but they offer CPD, and I've to continue on with that. That's all as annual registration, I should say, and all of them require us to do continuing professional development every year. Okay, we can use it, overlap it, but they all require us to do that to make sure that we can stay up to speed, because as we know, Parliament's sitting this week as well. There's more legislation that comes through. Even today, we've got the confirmation of working from home deductions. We have to stay up to date with all the changes. So that's what it requires us to do. So what the TPB's role is to make sure that we are doing the right thing, but they're not doing it alone, because, and this is the way I look at it, I see our tax practitioner board registration as being a subset of us being with some other regulatory body. So we've got, I'm on the accounting side of tax, not the law side of tax. So I've got 2 bodies that I have to stay compliant with as well.
Yeah.
And that means that I'm governed a lot on ethics and a higher probably level of ethics, you could say, than the tax practitioners board, but that enables me to provide tax advice. And then if you're on the law side of tax, so you're a tax lawyer, you've then got your practicing certificate with on the law side as well, right? So it is heavily regulated. So it's just one element to give confidence to our clients that we are very competent and we are very ethical and we do always do the right thing. Now, let's just pick up on that as well. I mean, there's a high profile case because there's a nice branding involved. I spoke to one of my colleagues yesterday and said, hey, Lisa, I've got a new client. The reason they've come to me is because they've got a letter from, now I can't remember if it was from the TPB or the ATO, it must be from the ATO, saying your existing tax agent has been deregistered. Right? Now, the good thing about things that happen with the Tax Practitioners Board, and you've alluded to what's happened with estimates, and now who watches estimates apart from nerds and us people that are really interested?
Yeah, I'm happy to be called a nerd by anybody. It's okay.
You know what I mean? People that are genuinely interested in it. All that information is online, so it was quite interesting. So I was talking to my colleague. I said, let's get on and have a look at what this tax agent was sanctioned for. Okay, he's been pinged for the max, which is the 5 years. And what did he do? He basically was frauding the government on JobKeeper and Cash Flow Boost. He also did not have his own tax affairs in place. So it's very much named and shamed, and we know why things are happening. So if we want to have a look at what the role of how the TPB sanctions, it's all on the Tax Practitioners Board website. You've just got to make sure you Google it properly, because if you just put TPB down, you get the Pirate Bay, which is the one you don't want. So you've just got to be careful of that, which is quite funny. If you just put TPB, you might get the Pirate Bay, not that one. It's tpb.gov.au, and you can find out exactly what it is. And I encourage clients to do that all the time. Check that your tax agent is registered. Have a look at it. They've got a great search engine to say, I want to find a registered tax agent near me. You don't go into Gumtree or something like that to find your tax agent. Find someone that is actually qualified, because we've not only got the skills and knowledge, but hey, we've got the ethical requirements to make sure we're doing the right thing for our clients.
One of the interesting things that I think we did a while back in a podcast is we actually did talk about a kind of a checklist for people who are out there in the big wide world who are looking for an advisor. So probably a good idea to sort of to run through the sort of the Tom Ravlic checklist again, just because it's been a while. I mean, yeah, if people are looking for an advisor, one of the first things to do if you're looking for someone and you're talking to them in the first place is to find out whether they're a member of a professional body of sorts and at what level. Now, typically, practitioners will be people who have a practicing certificate if they're running their own firm, and you need to find out whether they've got professional indemnity insurance. The other thing you will want to do, and we've spoken about the Tax Practitioners Board website, is go up there and check whether the person's registered if they haven't told you they're registered. So ask the question, and then if you feel the need to, you can freely double check. The practitioner would be able to give you their registration number. So if you want anybody that's unafraid of consumer scrutiny, we'll just give that information to you. And these days, you can even check the info on your mobile phone because you're able to look at the website on the mobile phone in somebody's office, if that's what you really want to do. The other thing that's interesting and can sometimes help is talking to people who use a tax agent or a financial advisor. For example, friends and others who've got someone they trust. You may be able to find an advisor that way. But there is an issue there, though. You may not feel comfortable dealing with a person that somebody else feels comfortable with for whatever reason. You're not obligated to engage with a practitioner somebody recommends. If you find you're a bit uneasy for whatever reason, practitioners understand that too. So, remember the issue of membership of a professional organisation, registration for an appropriate type of service, and also talk to people about the recommendations, whether they've got somebody that they recommend, and if you're not happy with any recommendation, you've still got plenty of people to choose from out there in the big wide world. There is one exception though that you need to keep in mind, which happens across the accounting world and no doubt in the legal space as well, and that is there are some faith communities that don't permit their members to be members of associations. For example, you will find that there are people who are auditors who won't be members of one of the professional bodies that look after auditors. Why? Their faith doesn't let them go down that road. And they don't go down that road as a result. So what will happen in regulation is that people will be registered, but the ethical requirements, for example, that apply to auditors that are from the accounting profession will apply to auditors that don't have membership in an accounting body as a matter of law. So consumer protection is still covered in that way.
But Tom, they still have to be registered with ASIC as a company auditor.
Yeah, they still have to have the audit registration, but the issue being they're not going to be a member they may not be a member of CPA Australia or the Institute of Public Accountants or the Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand because their religion doesn't permit associating in other groups of that nature. Now,
there is also a lot of tax agents that only have tax agent registration. There's a lot of BAS agents that have only got BAS agent registrations. They might have some other affiliation, but you can provide a tax agent service or a BAS agent service with just being registered with the Tax Practitioners Board.
So
just commonly, you've got a whole most practices. I'll say that most. In generalization, have got a number of arms, and that's where you can say, well, maybe the more credentials, you could say the more ethical we are. I think it's an ethics question, and that's what's coming up as well, to be a fit and proper person and basically keep up to speed abreast of all the tax changes and things.
Yeah.
Right, that's the thing that we're doing. But with having more credentials, you're just going to be monitored, if that's the right word, or you have to comply with more bodies.
Yeah, I think the main thing to think about here is make sure you ask the right questions, because ultimately, as I said in my book that came out back in 2020 called Rorts and Ripoffs, it's about the questions you ask in order to avoid getting the wrong outcome, or the wrong end of the stick, as they say in the classics. Lisa, have I forgotten anything?
Sorry, I was just going to say that's so true, Tom, because I think a lot of mentioning your Rorts and Ripoffs book, and you look at the things that have been happening since you've written that, in the crypto space that I've got a little bit of an interest in. It's always, you should always ask the question. You should be able to ask your tax agent, advisor, auditor any question you like as an understanding, and they should be able to take the time to explain things to you so you can understand them. So I would definitely say don't feel embarrassed or anything like that, because it's not in your area of expertise. Even if they're a doctor or an architect or whatever other professional, a pilot, anything like that, that's their area of expertise. Your area of expertise, like my area of expertise is in tax and accounting. So therefore, the client should always be able to ask me any questions. I can explain it to them. And that's really, really important.
I think that's critical, because some people may find it intimidating to deal with someone who's got a body of expertise, whereas the client should be the one asking the question and giving the kicking the said person with body of expertise in the shins a bit to get a better explanation.
Exactly. And like, if we know that it's not right, we'll tell you and say we can't do that. Right? It's not possible. And that doesn't mean you go off an opinion shop for everything. You don't go to like Dr. Google to see if you're dying or not. But that's exactly what we do, right? We basically say no, and this is the reason. And it then becomes a two-way conversation about this is the way the tax law works and why you can't claim this deduction. Said client.
I think what we're saying is there are only certain circumstances in this world where Adam Bandt's advice to journalists, I'm asking them to Google it during the last election campaign, fits. You are better off asking the questions of the expert, whether it be the accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, in order to get the answer. Because self-diagnosis can be rather risky, especially if you find that two symptoms you think you have are associated with about 3 or 4 different ailments. If you're not qualified as a medico, you're going to give yourself all sorts of other worries, as well as heightened blood pressure, no doubt, because you don't know how to interpret that.
Oh, exactly. And being an expert, we've got a very broad understanding of how things work as well, Tom. And we find that when a client asks us a question, they've got to know the consequences of of the answer we give them as well. So we need to understand if we take a deduction now, could that cause some sort of capital gains tax issue in the future, and all those sort of things that can come together. Like I'll have clients that'll come to me and say, Lisa, I want to save the most tax. And I go, well, is that the really right question to ask me? It's, do something for an economic reason and then let's work out the tax. But if you're going to do something for an economic reason, talk to me beforehand, because we might have a few options, but you do things to make $1 first. And if you save 50 cents on tax, fabulous. But if you've got to pay tax on all that dollar, well, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, and that's part of the fun. Lisa, you've been generous with your time. It's been a little while since we've done one of these. Where can people find out more about you online? You've got a website, haven't you?
Yeah, so my company is Perigi Advisors, and probably follow me on Twitter, Oztaxter, AUSTAXTER. I usually give a few pearls of wisdom that could be interesting either in the tax or crypto space. But yeah, I operate through my company, and so yeah, you can check me out and look me up and see what I do. So excellent. Thanks, Tom.
Well, I thank you for joining me, and we'll no doubt do one of these again fairly soon. Okay, everyone, take care, and we'll be in touch again through this podcast relatively shortly.